Man, y'all better sit down and grab a pen because class is in session. We are looking at the supplement stack of Clavicular. Now, usually, when a fitness influencer drops a stack, you expect some boring shit. You expect vitamin D3, maybe some fish oil if they feeling spicy. But this kid is running a cartel out of his bloodstream.
Now, first, we're going to start off with something boring, something over the counter. That's going to be caffeine, right? That's just something to give me a little bit of energy pre-workout. Now, the next stimulant that I use is going to be Adderall, right? 7.5 milligrams of Adderall IR. That's going to be what I use before I do my task-oriented things for the day. Any work I have to do on the computer that I might not otherwise want to. That's where the Adderall comes in. And, sometimes I'll replace that with Disoxin. I would advise you strongly to not do that, right? I would advise heavily against that, but it's just something I take sometimes just for transparency's sake. With the Disoxin, I'll usually keep the dose extremely low, around 5 milligrams if I have to use Disoxin.
He says, I take caffeine to do my laundry. Okay, you got a basket of dirty drawers, you pop a caffeine pill, you get it done. But then he pivots immediately to the hard stuff. He says, I take 7.5 milligrams of Adderall before I do my task-oriented things, any workout using the computer. Bruh, you need amphetamines to use a computer? Are you hacking the Pentagon? Dexine is prescription-grade ice. Doctors give this to people with ADHD so bad they vibrate. And this dude is taking it to look at a monitor. Bro needs meth to send an email.
The next thing on the list, since we use all those stimulants, is going to be something for vasodilation, right? We're going to be using Cialis. Cialis is a phenomenal tool, and it is quite literally the best thing that you could do for your health, right? Lowering your blood pressure slightly long-term can have real health benefits, and there's literally no downsides to not take Cialis.
He says, it is quite literally the best thing you could do for your health. Vasodilation, lowering blood pressure. Bruh, stop it. Cialis is for your dick. It is for when you are 50 years old, you got a mortgage, your wife hates you, and your soldier refuses to stand at attention. Technically, he ain't wrong about the mechanism. Cialis is a vasodilator. Stimulants cause vasoconstriction. They make your dick shrink up. So he has to take Cialis just to keep his blood flowing. And let's be real, if you were taking Cialis every day for health, you were walking around with a semi-hard-on at the grocery store. You standing in line at Whole Foods, high on meth, sweating. Excuse me, ma'am, don't mind the bowls. I'm just optimizing my vascularity. You don't need a boner pill to edit videos, bro.
And that's why I use Noopept, right? So Noopept is going to be a very, very basic nootropic. Obviously, we got to use alpha GPC with it.
He calls Noopept entry level. Noopept is a Russian research chemical. It's supposed to make you focus, but in Russia, they prescribe it for alcoholics who drink their brains in the mush. Clavicular is 19. His brain is fresh out the box, or it was until he started treating it like a chemistry set.
The next nootropic, or something that I use for neurogenesis rather, is going to be Cerebrolysin. So I spent a lot of time over the summer, engaging in some not good habits, engaging in some dopamine toxicity, some sleep deprivation.
Cerebrolysin is a peptide solution made from purified pig brains. They take a pig, they blend its brain into a smoothie, they filter out the chunks, and they put it in a glass vial. Bruh, that is nasty. Doctors use this for old people with dementia, people whose brains are rotting. Clavicular admits he spent the summer engaging in dopamine toxicity, which is fancy talk for tweaking out of his mind, so now he has to inject pig brains to patch the holes in the drywall. Oink, oink.
The next thing on my list for, reducing the amount of neurotoxicity, if you're someone who uses stimulants, maybe the sleep deprivation on top of that, whatever neurotoxic habits that you engage in, we're going to use Mexidol to remove, the risks of neurotoxicity, from the oxidative stress and, the dopamine toxicity. Mexidol is going to protect our brain from that a little bit. Meldonium is going to be phenomenal for, harm reduction. There was a time not too long ago where I almost had, a full-on heart attack and, a lot of health complications from prolonged stimulant usage, the vasoconstriction, I had certain heart, issues. So Mexidol kind of made sure, or Meldonium rather, made sure that I actually survived that night. So that was quite, of the experience, but Meldonium and Mexidol are the ultimate protective agents that you could use if you're doing degenerate shit like me.
He admits, I take Mexidol and Meldonium because I almost had a full-on heart attack recently from the stimulants. A heart attack. Bro is 20 years old, clutching his chest like Lizzo. Meldonium is a drug developed in the Soviet Union for soldiers and heart failure patients. It forces your cells to survive when they are starving for oxygen. And Mexidol? That's for stroke victims and alcoholics going through withdrawal tremors. And he calls this health? Nah, this is damage control. That is a vicious cycle, bro.
The next thing on the list is going to be glutathione, right? We obviously already talked about this. Now you could take the NAC, the precursor to glutathione, but right now we're injecting it intramuscularly, and quite literally the best antioxidant that you could use. You already produce it endogenously. So if you're someone who regularly drinks, maybe you're on an oral steroid, maybe you're on Accutane, that amount of oxidative stress, that amount of liver toxicity, we could somewhat try to regulate and mitigate it with glutathione. Once again, not a get out of jail free card, but a lot of people are going to do things anyway, so you might as well do things in the most healthy way possible. So that's why I'd recommend you take a look into that. Now we're going to get into one more antioxidant, which is going to be melatonin, right? So melatonin, a lot of people don't know this, but it's one of the best antioxidants for your liver and especially for your brain, right? So if you use melatonin after a night of drinking, this could kind of, offset some of the damage once again. But people don't realize that the dosing is a little bit weird for melatonin, right? So I make some videos on TikTok from time to time where I inform people that you could take 300 to 500 milligrams of melatonin, and this is going to be a phenomenal antioxidant. And they're like, wait a second, most of the dosing and recommendations online are 5 to 10 milligrams. So what's going on? Yes, absolutely. It is very likely that you'll wake up the next morning, be extremely groggy because you have super sensitive receptors. But once you do this for a prolonged period of time, those receptors start to downregulate and you could reap only the benefits of the antioxidant and not all the drowsiness, grogginess. So eventually over time, you will start to be able to regularly take melatonin at that high of a dose.
Now, normal people take 3 to 5 milligrams of melatonin, maybe 10 if the rent is due and you're stressed out. Clavicular says, I take 300 to 500 milligrams. If you take 500 milligrams of melatonin, you ain't going to sleep, you go into hibernation. Melatonin is a hormone. Your pineal gland makes it naturally when the sun goes down. When you flood your body with 100 times the natural dose, you are frying the receiver. If he misses one dose of that 500 milligrams, he won't sleep until the year 2030.
The next thing on the list is going to be for my fertility, and that's going to be HCG, right? So obviously I'm someone who's been using steroids, TRT, for a long period of time. So I need to keep my fertility, I need to keep my neurosteroids healthy, and I need to keep my testicles from atrophying. So if I want to have a kid in the future, that's still a possibility. So we're using HCG at 250 units twice per week. Now, I'll admit I'm not the most consistent with this, but with HCG, I tend to feel a lot better, right? So obviously the neurosteroids are a huge role in that. And I would strongly advise, if you're someone who's going to be taking steroids for an extended period of time, that you don't let your testicles atrophy so that we don't have fertility issues in the future. The next thing on the list that I take is going to be HGH, right? So with HGH, it is one of the best things for lipolysis and muscle growth, right? So we've obviously got the different growth pathways with IGF, we've got with, our anabolism and things of this nature and insulin, but we might as well maximize our IGF-1, right? So we're going to be using HGH because, obviously IGF-1 LR3 is quite expensive, and HGH is going to turn into IGF-1 when it's synthesized in the liver. So this is a great way to get a bit of additional IGF-1, some additional lipolysis throughout the night. The only issue with this is obviously going to be the blood glucose levels, but we can, counteract that issue by just using HGH after we finish our last meal, a little bit after that, of course, right before we go to bed, so that we're fasted, throughout the time that we're using the HGH, so that we don't run into any issues where we're going to need anything to fix our blood glucose levels. right? So I've been having consistently good blood glucose despite using HGH for prolonged periods of time. Now I'm only using about 4 units every other day. Sometimes I'll do 2 units every day, but I would say that this is the optimal sweet spot between 2 and 4 units of HGH. The next thing that I'm going to use is going to be Anavar, right? So I'm using 12.5 milligrams of Anavar. It is my favorite oral steroid, even though it's a DHT derivative, because it's less androgenic and less of an issue in terms of your hair than pure DHT, right? Masteron. So the androgenicity is a little bit different. You know, the effects on the hairline are a little bit different than straight up Masteron, even though it's the same class of drug, right? So Anavar is going to be phenomenal. There's going to be glucocorticoid receptor downregulation, right? So obviously when you downregulate that receptor, your adrenal glands are not going to secrete as much cortisol, which is a catabolic hormone. So Anavar is super anti-catabolism, and it's a phenomenal growth pathway to optimize, because with testosterone, we're not going to downregulate the GCR. And obviously the next steroid that we're going to discuss is going to be testosterone. Test is best. This is the base for all your success, right? So if you're using steroids, you need to be using some sort of testosterone base, because that's going to convert into all the necessary hormones that your body needs. So, you know, we are going to cover all bases with testosterone. We're going to get that conversion into estradiol through the aromatase enzyme. And, you know, without testosterone, you're going to feel like shit, you're going to look like shit, and you won't have any sexual function. So we need at least 100 milligrams of testosterone in any cycle, no matter what you're doing. Now,
Testosterone, HCG, HGH, Anavar. When you inject testosterone, your body says, oh, we got plenty. Cool, I'm clocking out. And your balls shut down. They turn into raisins. So what does he take to fix that? HCG. He says, I take this to keep my fertility and stop my testicles from atrophying. And then Anavar. Anavar is famous for 2 things. One is mild. It's often called the girl steroid because female fitness models take it. And 2, it doesn't make you lose your hair as bad as the other stuff. And finally, HGH, human growth hormone. He takes 2 to 4 units. He says it's for lipolysis or fat loss. Bruh, it's way too much shit.
the next thing I'm going to talk about is melanotan-2, right? Obviously, from my last videos, I've been getting a lot more tan, and that is due to the fact that I've been using melanotan-2. So melanotan-2 is legit, right? We've obviously got the oxytocin benefits, sexual function benefits, and slight appetite modulation, right? So the appetite modulation and suppression comes from the fact that it sort of nauseates you. So the next thing that we're going to discuss is isotretinoin.
Accutane shrinks your oil glands. It dries you out. It makes your lips crack and bleed. He wants to look like a filtered photo, but he probably feels like a dried up lizard in real life. And the color? He takes melanotan-2. This is an injectable tan. It turns you dark without the sun. And he takes a carotenoid blend. He says, I need the golden undertones. Bruh, are you painting a car? He is injecting chemicals to turn brown and eating pills to turn orange. He trying to look like a swole Oompa Loompa.
The next thing I'm going to discuss is the going out stack. So what exactly do I take to go out? Because I'm someone who's anti-alcohol. So what can we do to actually mimic the effects of alcohol, be low inhibition without damaging our growth pathways? Pregabalin, right? Now the next thing we're going to use is a GABA B agonist, which is baclofen, right? So as many of you guys know, alcohol is going to agonize the GABA A receptor. So we're going to hit a similar receptor with GABA B. And when synergized with pregabalin, it could give you a pretty good stack and pretty closely mimic alcohol's effects. The next thing that I'm going to talk about that I've used and I don't consistently use is alprazolam.
He says, I don't drink alcohol. Alcohol is toxic. It kills gains. All right, cool. Be sober. Drink water or some shit. But nah, he needs to be low inhibition at the club. So instead of a beer, he pops a cocktail of pregabalin, baclofen, and Xanax. That is the Bill Cosby starter pack. And this dude is slipping it to himself. Baclofen, phenibut, Xanax hit the GABA receptors. They shut down the anxiety center of your brain. But here's the difference. A beer wears off in an hour. Baclofen and pregabalin, that shit lingers for 24 hours. He says he wants to mimic being drunk without the calories. If you can't talk to a female without chemically lobotomizing yourself, stay your ass home.
The next thing I'm going to discuss is my hair loss protocol. Now that's going to be 2.5 milligrams of minoxidil and 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride, right? So I'm trying to wipe out as much DHT as possible, and 0.5 is the often prescribed dose of dutasteride, which I find to be quite ridiculous considering that's only going to block about 80 to 85% of DHT. My goal is to block 100, so I'm getting as close as I can with 2.5 milligrams, and there is no increase in side effects, no risk increase at using that dose over 0.5. So I'd highly recommend you guys, use 2.5 over 0.5.
Now we get to the vanity drugs, the hair. He takes 2.5 milligrams of dutasteride. He says, I want to block 100% of my DHT. I don't want a single molecule of DHT in my body. Let me break down the biology for you. DHT, dihydrotestosterone, is what makes your hair fall out. True, but DHT is also what makes your dick work. It's what gives you aggression. It's what puts bass in your voice. It is the fuel of masculinity. The standard dose for hair loss is 0.5 milligrams. He's taking 5 times the dose. My guy, you are chemically castrating yourself. You looked at your own balls and said, I don't need you anymore. I need a hairline. You prioritize the selfie over the stroke? Imagine bringing a girl home. You look like a model. Hair is perfect. Skin is glowing from the orange chemicals. And then nothing happens. Sorry, baby. My DHT is at 0, but did you see my Norwood scale?
The next thing I'm going to use is retatrutide, right? So I'm using between 12 and 15 milligrams, depending on the week, of retatrutide. The next peptide on the list that I use for damage prevention and protection of my heart, right, cardio protection, is going to be BPC 157. The next thing I'm going to discuss is ketamine. So ketamine S isomer is probably the best isomer of ketamine that you could find, right? And this is going to be amazing for resetting your stimulant tolerance.
And finally, the cherry on top of this toxic sundae, ketamine and retatrutide. Retatrutide is the new experimental fat burner. Clavicular 6'2", rips, and he's taking 15 milligrams. This drug spikes your heart rate and kills your appetite. He is essentially chemically anorexic. Since when did men get so scared of a little fat? Oh no, my face isn't hollow enough. Bruh, eat a steak. You look like a starved greyhound. And the ketamine? Special K, horse tranquilizer. He says he uses it to reset his stimulant tolerance. And he calls this optimization? Nah, this is a walking autopsy. He ain't looks maxing, he's life minding. He's speed running death just to leave a pretty corpse. I'm out. I'm gonna go take a Flintstone vitamin and keep my testosterone where it belongs, in my balls.